So we're going to go ahead and jump into talking about a Start Here guide for ALS and communication. And what we hope you take away from today is kind of what to expect and where to begin, because we know that this diagnosis is daunting and there's a lot to think about. And so we hope this training can help both today and in the future for anybody who comes back to the recording. As Trinity said, we are very excited to be co-presenting this topic with Shara, and Ben Lehman from the ALS United Greater New York team also helped us in developing the content. And it's a really nice kind of connection that we've strengthened recently with our New York initiative. So I'll talk a little more about that as well. For those who are new to Bridging Voice, we like to start each training with an overview of who we are. So we are a nonprofit that was launched in 2019, and our team includes a multidisciplinary group of 7 SLPs, speech language pathologists, 2 occupational therapists, and 4 programmers and engineers are now on our growing team, where we just added 2 new staff, which we're really excited about. And we focus on supporting people with ALS, their caregivers, and other practitioners related to communication, computer access, and assistive technology throughout the diagnosis or progression of ALS, so at any stage. In this work, we've been thankful to work with over 6,500 people with ALS in all 50 states and now in 52 different countries. So we feel so privileged and glad that we are connected, and you all help us continue to get connected with more people. Bridging Voice services include kind of a multifaceted approach to make sure that individuals with ALS, their caregivers, and other practitioners are getting what they need to kind of live their best life. And if you're working with this population, serve them in the best possible ways. So we provide our services remotely for people across the country, and as we said, sometimes in other countries. And our focuses are on helping support technology evaluations and getting access to technology, providing training and support not only to the person with ALS on how to use that technology, but also their caregivers or other individuals who are working with people with ALS. So kind of maybe the bread and butter, the secret sauce at Bridging Voices are customized solutions. So we know that with a diagnosis of ALS, things change over time, and not every piece of technology can come right out of the box and work well for everyone. And so we're here to really kind of personalize and customize those systems to make sure they meet everyone's needs. And then we do professional education like today. We provide trainings online. We go to conferences. We try to connect with our referral partners and other clinicians or nonprofit organizations to make sure that we're really helping build the ecosystem of support for people with ALS. And maybe the key thing is that our services are always free. We don't bill insurance. There's no eligibility requirement other than the fact that somebody has ALS and needs help. So we're happy to have you reach out to us. Okay, as Trinity said, we recently launched our New York State initiative, which has a goal of serving every person with ALS in the state of New York. So if you are a person with ALS, if you know people with ALS, if you're working with people who have ALS in the state of New York, we want to hear from you. We want to hear from anybody in any state. But given this new initiative, we're also really trying to drive forth services and supports there. We are very thankful to our New York partners who have helped to make this possible and are listed on the slide. And one of those really important partners is ALS United of Greater New York. So we're going to talk a little bit more about their services as well. So ALS United Greater New York is also a nonprofit organization serving people with ALS, and they have been working with over 1,200 people living with ALS for the past 30 years. So this is a really strong and important organization. And at the bottom of the slide here, you can see they work with people in New York City, Long Island, northern and central New Jersey, as well as the Hudson Valley area. So their reach is far and wide, and if you are in these areas, you want to be connected with them. ALS United Greater New York also provides services related to technology and communication like Bridging Voice does, but their reach is also wider in terms of focus on national and state advocacy, doing research, cutting edge research initiatives, providing multidisciplinary care through their certified clinical centers, providing educational outreach and community resources, mental health and wellness programs, their assistive technology and equipment loan program, and just looking at the whole person with ALS and their caregivers and their team to provide a really comprehensive patient and family care support. So they do their, like I said, their reach is far and wide, and they're important people for you to know if you are in the greater New York area. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get into kind of the agenda of our talk today. Our goal is that you will walk away from today understanding a little bit more about the potential communication changes that can happen with ALS. And we're going to talk about three major areas that might be important to think about, knowing kind of how things can change over time. We're going to talk about an overview of voice preservation, some speech and voice conservation strategies, and we're going to introduce augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. Then at the end, we want to wrap up with kind of how to plan ahead with confidence and know what you can do if things are changing for you. And throughout the presentation and at the end, we have some perspectives from people who are living with ALS to share more about kind of that lived experience, not just hearing from us as practitioners, but also hearing from other people who have or are going through it. So let's get right into it. We want to talk about introducing ALS and the potential communication changes that can occur with this diagnosis. And we think it's really important to point out that even though it's the same diagnosis in name or on paper, it can mean very different journeys for each individual person. And everyone's experience and trajectory is really unique. So the things that we're talking about today may not apply to you right now. If you've been newly diagnosed, there may be things in here that you don't necessarily need now, but you may need down the road. And so the way that looks can be through different onset types. For example, a bulbar onset typically starts with changes in the person's head and neck, which results in speech and swallowing changes, where a limb onset typically starts in the arms and legs, and the changes in strength and coordination might be what you see first. And so the tools we're going to talk about today may apply in different orders, may not apply at all, or may apply sooner than later, depending on what your onset type is and kind of what your experience is. We also want to recognize that there are a lot of emotional aspects to receiving a diagnosis like ALS. It means a lot of change in your life, a lot of change in your family members' lives. And so some of this information may be tricky or difficult to hear. So we understand if anybody is feeling like I need to step away because I don't want to listen to this right now, or it's hard for me to hear this right now, and come back as you can. And we also want to reiterate that this training is being recorded so that you can come back and watch it at any point that it's useful to you. And you'll be able to refer back to specific sections, the ones that are most applicable to you at different times in your journey. So please keep that in mind as well. All right. When we think about potential motor and speech changes in ALS, this is not a linear trajectory. Just like we were talking about, everyone's journey is different, and we have no way necessarily to predict exactly what this will look like. But we do know that for most people with ALS, they will experience changes in their speech and they will experience changes in their hand function. And so what's represented on this chart along the top arrow you see for speech intelligibility, there's a spectrum between speaking clearly and being unable to be understood with your speech. And anybody can fall anywhere within that spectrum at a given time of their diagnosis. Similarly, on the left side of the chart, you can see there's a spectrum of using your hands well to being unable to use your hands effectively, and again, anywhere in between. To kind of simplify and talk about the different tools and strategies that we're thinking of today, we're going to kind of make some boxes on this chart, but know that nobody fits perfectly into one of these boxes. But what we're going to be talking about today are for people who are still speaking pretty clearly, and using their hands well, there are still some things you could be thinking about and potentially doing right now. Those things include voice preservation and thinking about conservation strategies to make your speech and your voice as effective as possible. So we'll talk more about that. For individuals who are still using their hands well, but maybe their speech is becoming more difficult, we're going to talk to you guys about some options with text-to-speech applications and manual communication tools that may be applicable to you now, or if these changes haven't happened but could in the future, you'll know ahead of time what you have available. For individuals who are speaking clearly, kind of the opposite, your speech is still pretty clear, but your hand use is becoming more difficult. We'll share some more information about voice control and alternative access options for your phone, computer, or tablet. And then for individuals who have maybe experienced changes in both areas, their speech and their hands are becoming less effective or not meeting all of their needs. For those individuals, we'll touch on dedicated communication devices or speech generating devices and alternative access. So I just said a lot of terms that may mean nothing to you yet. And I think one thing we want to highlight is that receiving a diagnosis like ALS can mean that you are learning a whole new language. Medical terms in the medical fields and these kind of areas especially, we use a lot of acronyms and we use a lot of terms that can be tricky. And so I wanted to just highlight some of the terms that you're likely going to hear throughout our presentation today. And if you want to hear more about, or if you want more of a list, Carly, our social media person, has been our communicate. She does more than that, but she's been posting a lot of really great things, especially this May for ALS Awareness Month. So if you follow us, or if you don't already, please do follow us on social media or LinkedIn, and you can see more posts that relate to things like this that may be useful. So today you're going to hear the terms ALS, obviously. If you hear PALS or PWALS, we're talking about a person who's living with ALS, and CALS or CALS is a caregiver of a person with ALS. We're also going to talk about some different professionals you're likely to interact with, an SLP or speech language pathologist, which is what Sarah and our roles are, an occupational therapist or OT, an assistive tech professional or ATP. And then we're also going to talk about some terms. We already said AAC, which is augmentative and alternative communication. We'll talk more about what that means and kind of some examples of that. You may also hear us say text to speech or TTS and speech generating device or SGD. So we wanted to give you this list to refer back to because these are terms that you're likely to hear a lot when you're talking about communication in ALS. And so knowing kind of what they mean can be really helpful. Okay, so let's get into it. I want to give an overview of voice preservation and talk a little bit about why you may do it. So voice preservation is recording and storing a backup of your natural voice. And the reason that you might do it is to make sure that you can still sound like you, even if your speech or your voice changes. So one thing we know about ALS is that it frequently can impact people's voice and their ability to speak clearly. And so if we can record your voice either before those changes happen or use recordings of you from before those changes happen, you have the opportunity to kind of have an insurance policy where you're saving your voice in case you need it in a different format later. And thinking about when to do this, we often say the earlier the better because we don't have a crystal ball to know if or how or when your speech may change. And so the sooner we can do it, the better chance we have of preserving your voice as it sounds, as closely to your kind of natural voice fingerprint as we can. That being said, though, we know that there are people who experience voice and speech changes as their first symptoms of ALS. And so there are other options if your voice changed before you made recordings, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. There are many benefits to voice preservation, but we want to make sure to kind of mention these big ones. Recording your voice helps maintain your sense of identity and your sense of self. Our voices are very unique to us. They're almost like a fingerprint. And being able to speak in your own voice, even if ALS changes it, can be really powerful and meaningful. Related to that, not only for yourself, but also for your loved ones, it helps maintain a familiarity with your voice in your relationships with people. And that can make a big difference when you're communicating with others. If you think about using a communication app or device where a voice is coming out of some kind of box and it just sounds like a computer and doesn't sound like you, that doesn't kind of register the same way as your true authentic voice coming out of those options. And we'll talk more about those. And then finally, it gives you an opportunity to share important messages and thoughts in your own voice. So if you think about the kind of things that you say that make you who you are and who that are very unique to you, we could never really capture those through using some other kind of produced voice. So recording yourself gives you a chance to keep those versions of yourself, and it also gives you a chance to kind of process the changes that are coming on and maybe share messages with your family or your caregivers that you want to make sure that they know. So that's why voice preservation is really important. There are several options for voice preserving your voice, which we're not going to go into depth about today, but Bridging Voice has done a training on this in the past. So at the bottom of the slide, and then Trinity will drop in the chat as well, and it will come in the resources that come out after the recorded presentation is posted. We do have several slides where we mention previous trainings from Bridging Voice. So if you would like to learn more about message banking, voice banking, and voice cloning, which are kind of the three formats for voice preservation, you can go ahead and watch our training to learn more and get more in-depth information. Okay. And then we want to kind of, as I said at the beginning, we want to touch on advice from people who are living with ALS and who have experienced this before. So Sean shared that he had no idea about voice banking. Bank and clone your voice. You won't regret it. I think it's important to recognize that we don't, like we said, we don't have a crystal ball to know what will happen with your voice. And so doing the process can only help make sure that that your voice is saved if things do change. And then Bruce, who's a caregiver for an individual with ALS, says, learn about preserving your original voice by voice banking. Each person's progression varies. Preserve your voice as soon as possible after a diagnosis. And so, again, I think that speaks to kind of the sooner the better idea of preserving your voice while you can, and making sure you really capture your authentic voice. So if this has spurred you on to want to start this process sooner than later, we did want to include some information about where you can get help to get started with voice preservation. So the maybe the first place to start is with your local ALS clinic, your local ALS organization like ALS United Greater New York or an ALS Association chapter, depending on what state you're in. Or if you're working with a speech language pathologist, either at a clinic or in home health in your area, those people are a great place to start and see if they can provide help with how to preserve your voice, how to record it, what to do with it. We also can be a resource at Bridging Voice. We provide education for anyone in any state. So if you want to learn more about what the options are and kind of what you could do, we can give you that background and more information. If you want hands-on help, we are able to help directly for people in Maryland and New York through our state initiatives. Or Team Gleason is another nonprofit organization who provides funding and support for anyone in any state with voice preservation. And so their website is here on the slide and will be in the resources that are shared. So you can learn more about how to get connected for help with voice preservation. Let's move on to some speech and voice conservation strategies. And what we mean by this is with ALS, sometimes your voice or your speech will start to change. You're still able to speak, people are still able to hear you and understand you, but it may become more effortful to speak, or it may eventually become more difficult for people to understand. And so there are some conservation strategies that you or the people around you can use to help make your voice and your speech as effective as possible for as long as possible. So we're going to go into some of those strategies. One area for speech and voice conservation is changing how you speak if you are the person with ALS. And that can include kind of changing your pacing. So when we talk fast, we're always a little bit harder to understand. So slowing down your speaking rate can really help make your speech more intelligible. That, in combination with what we call over-articulation or emphasizing the sounds in your words, can help make your speech more intelligible to the person that's listening to you. And then we also know that with ALS, sometimes using breathing techniques can also make your speech more intelligible or easier for other people to understand. So, what we recommend is inhaling deeply when you're going to talk, using a controlled exhale while you're talking. So, not letting the air come out really quickly, but kind of slowly letting the air out while you're talking. And maybe breaking it up into less words per breath, because that can help keep your voice more strong and clear as you're talking. So, let's say you would typically say a sentence with one breath. Maybe you take a breath, say the first half of the sentence, take another breath, say the second half of the sentence. That can really help with that strong, clear voice. And we don't expect anybody to leave from that brief explanation I just gave and be able to implement these strategies totally independently in all of your conversations. These are the kinds of things that it can help to practice with a speech language pathologist. They can figure out how they might incorporate most effectively into your daily communication. And so if you think that using some speech or voice conservation strategies would be helpful for you, it's a good idea to reach out to your local speech language pathologist or your team at Bridging Voice or ALS Greater New York or anywhere else like that and get some help from an SLP on how to implement these kinds of strategies. In addition to kind of changing the ways that you talk, you can also implement some additional tools that might help. So, things we think about are like a voice amplifier. If you find that your voice is getting softer and quieter, either all day or at the end of the day or after you've spoken for a while, a voice amplifier uses a microphone and a speaker so that you can talk at a normal volume or even a quieter volume, and the speaker helps amplify your voice. What's good about this tool is it can reduce the effort it takes for you to project your voice, and it can also help you conserve your energy when you're talking. So voice amplifiers are a great tool, and you can get them from your local ALS chapter or from your local speech language pathologist. And then another tool that you might implement are light tech or low tech communication tools. And we're going to go more in depth about some examples of these. But what we're talking about is if you were trying to speak and communicate something and somebody wasn't understanding it, you could use a backup like writing or typing a word or two so that they get kind of the idea of what you're trying to say. Or you could use a manual communication board to point to letters or pictures to help them understand what you're communicating. So these can be used as a supplement to help sustain your speech and make your speech more effective. Oops, sorry. Let me just get the slides going again. Um, Another area of speech and voice conservation involves the communication partner that you're talking with. And so as person with ALS experiences changes in their speech, the listener that they're talking to can help kind of increase their responsibilities, so to speak, or be more actively involved in assisting with the communication. And so some ways that communication partners can do that are by giving their full attention to the person with ALS. When you sit face to face with each other and you communicate more directly, you can see their face, you can see their facial expressions and gestures. So you get more information, which can make it easier to understand their communication and can also help decrease the effort they're using to communicate. We also really recommend and try to emphasize being patient. It can be really hard not to interrupt or try to guess and figure out what they're saying, but often that can almost derail the person who's speaking and make it even harder. So using patience when you're communicating is really important. Um, Another communication partner tip is to be honest about what you understood. So if a person is speaking and you only understood a portion of what they said, you can repeat back what you did understand. So the person with ALS only has to repeat the part you didn't understand, which can again help conserve their energy and can help you both be on the same page about what you're understanding and what you're not. Another tip for speaking with anybody who has the communication changes is to respect their autonomy. Sometimes we think I can help if I speak for you or if I figure out what you're saying or if I think I know what you're saying, but often that can actually again, derail people or make it harder for them to communicate because they kind of get started and stopped. So one really important way to respect autonomy is to ask. If you know somebody, if you're, living with a person with ALS and you know them very well, you may be good at guessing what they're trying to say and they may want you to do that. But if you don't know them as well, or you're somebody who's, meeting up with them for the first time, that may actually be counterproductive. So asking if they would like you to try to figure it out or just wait can be helpful. And then you can also, as a communication partner, help to manage fatigue, help take breaks when you're having a long conversation, things like that, that can help maintain communication for longer. Okay. And then the kind of the last area for speech and voice conservation that we'll touch on is the environment. So we know that we're dealing with what the person with ALS is dealing with in terms of their voice and speech. We know that as a listener, we have jobs that we need to do, but also everything around us has an impact on how we communicate with each other. So if you are in a noisy environment, it can really help to eliminate or minimize those background noises. Examples of what that might look like at home are muting the TV or music that's on, reducing side conversations if you're in a group of people. This isn't always possible, but depending on where you are, if you're in a noisy city where there are sirens and dogs barking, maybe you move to a more interior room when you're having conversations to make sure you're kind of tuning out as much as you can. In public, that can mean choosing less noisy places or areas. And what we mean by that is if you know that this restaurant is very echoey and it's always very busy and there's lots of people, that might be a place where it's more difficult to have conversations. But if you know of a restaurant where you can kind of sit in the back, you can be away from the door and the bar and the host stand, or music playing on speakers, that can help make it easier and quieter even when you are out in public. When you're choosing a table, choosing a booth that has high sides versus sitting at a table in the middle of the room can help dampen some of the other noise in the room. So those are things you can think about when you choose places to go in public. And then lastly, keeping some of those tools accessible. So we talked about having writing or manual communication boards as a backup to speech. If the tools aren't with you, they aren't useful. So at home, it might mean leaving notepads or writing tablets or communication boards in multiple rooms in your space so that they're always available to use as a backup. Or when you're going out to somewhere in the public, maybe you always keep a little notepad and pen or a communication board in your bag or your car or your purse. So keeping those tools accessible is kind of step one to having them be useful. Okay, we are going to now jump into an introduction to augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. What AAC is any tool that helps to supplement or replace speech. So this can be things that even while you're still speaking, you use to help make sure you're understood. Or if it becomes really difficult to speak, you may start using AAC as a primary communication strategy. And the reason to use AAC is to make sure that you can always communicate, even if your speech is affected by ALS. We never want somebody to feel like they have to give up on these kinds of things because of the changes that ALS can cause. And so we want you to see AAC as a tool in your tool belt that helps make sure you can always communicate. And when we think about using AAC, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be that I can't communicate at all now, so now I use AAC. It can be that you implement tools like this anytime you can't communicate effectively in any setting. So let's say it's just getting harder to communicate over the phone, or it's just getting harder to communicate at the end of the day when you're tired, or if you're wearing a mask to help give you more, to help with your breathing, it may be harder to communicate. You can think about AAC as a tool that you use in very specific situations, as well as over time having that grow to using it more frequently. So we're going to talk about a few different AAC types or options and give you some examples of them. Again, this is going to be a lot of information that may or may not be applicable to you right now, depending on where you are in your journey. We want to tell you about what's out there so that you know what you can ask for. But we also want to remind you that it may not be that you need these tools right now, or it may be that some of these tools don't apply to you in your progression. So just keep this in mind and refer back to this recording later if you need reminders. So the first area we want to talk about is what we call manual communication. It's often also called light tech or low tech. But the idea with this is it's a group of communication tools that don't require power or a battery. So often it's printed, laminated boards that you can hold and point to, that someone could hold up and you can look at. So it gives you a way to communicate using pictures or letters without having to have any kind of battery or power. These can be used both as a backup to your speech or to other technology, as well as a primary communication strategy. So, just like we were talking about earlier, you may use these while you're still speaking and use it to supplement your speech when people aren't understanding you. Or there are people who also use this as a primary way that they communicate. The person on your team that you would ask for help with this is the speech language pathologist. Typically, they can help you decide what kind of board would be the most useful and make sure you have access to it. So I'm going to give a couple of examples. Writing is one of the tools we talked about, and this can be done with pen and paper. Some people like to take a notepad so that if you write and turn the page, you can refer back to things you've already written previously. And other people like to use a writing tablet, like the one in the picture here on the bottom left. It's similar to like a Magnadoodle where you can write on it and then you can clear it and write again. So it gives you a reusable writing tablet or space to spell out words or sentences if you need help communicating that way. And then on the right, we have two examples of manual communication boards. These can be text-based, like the top one that has the letters of the alphabet. Someone can point to the letters to spell, or they can use other strategies to communicate even if you can't point. And on our website at the bottom of the slide, you can access that board to download in English and Spanish. And there's also a video that shows how to use it with a partner if you can't point any longer. So that gives you some nice ideas. Manual boards can also have pictures or words. There are lots of ways that they can be created and personalized to your needs. The next communication option we're going to talk about is communication apps. So these are text-to-speech programs that typically go on a personal phone, computer, or tablet. And what we mean by text-to-speech is there's something typed or stored that's written out, and when you select it, it speaks in a computerized voice. That computerized voice could be from your voice preservation, or it could be a generic voice that's on the phone or tablet or computer. When to think about using this is when you're still using your hands well, but maybe your speech is still becoming less clear. So if you've had changes in your hands, but you can still type or use your phone or tablet or computer effectively, this can be a useful way to help supplement your speech. The speech language pathologist or AT professional on your team can be a really useful resource in kind of determining what app is the best match for you. We've included some examples on these slides, the names and some images. But what I think is really important to know is that each of these apps have different features that can make them more useful to different people. And so you can download these from app stores, or for example, Live Speech is readily available on Apple devices. But you may want to talk to your speech language pathologist, or we recommend you talk to your speech language pathologist about the different apps to make sure you're getting one that has all the features that will be most useful for you. And we again have a training on mobile communication apps on our training website. All right. Voice control is another option for controlling your technology using voice commands. And I think people are often familiar with like the commands you can give to the S name on phones, or the A name or Google. And people are often familiar with dictation as well, which is where you speak and it types out what you're saying into a text message or into a document. But voice control goes beyond that and gives you more control over what you can do. You can basically access almost anywhere on your phone or tablet or computer when you have the right commands. So this would be used when someone is speaking still relatively clearly, though technology can understand some changes in speech, so you could use it even if you're starting to experience changes. But for people who are maybe unable to use their hands effectively to access their phone or tablet or computer any longer, the professional on your team who's most likely to help with this is your occupational therapist or AT professional. And the idea with it, just to show you some examples of what it can look like, are that you can have overlays put onto your device. So in this top right picture, you can see there's a phone that has the names of the apps displayed, and then there's another one that has numbers associated with each phone. So that's an example of where you can tell it to open apps or go to particular parts of the screen that you maybe wouldn't be able to do with just typical dictation or commands to Siri, or Alexa or Google. And then it also does include the option for dictation. So using a microphone to speak in what you want it to type on your behalf. Again, we have a training that goes more in depth. So if you think this is an area that you might want to learn more, you can check out this training on our website. Another place that we think about for AAC is alternative access. And so these are alternatives to a traditional mouse, keyboard, or touch screen on a device. And the idea is that if you've had changes in how you're using your hands, regardless of your speech status, these are tools that may help you access your technology more effectively, and use less energy. Again, on your team, your OT or AT professional can help you figure out which tools might be the best match for you, but we'll show some examples again. So if you've experienced maybe some changes in your hands where isolating your finger and touching accurately on a touch screen is getting difficult, but you still have some good movement in your arms, or your hands, you may want to use a stylus that gives you a more kind of focused place to tap on the screen. There's an example here in the bottom left that wraps around the person's wrist and hand to give more stability. There are versions where there's a ball or a bar that you can hold in a fist, and then a stylus comes out from your fist to make it easier to point. So there are lots of different stylus options that could help. If you have movement in your wrist and you can move your hand maybe, but it's hard to move an entire mouse to move things across the screen, a trackball might be a good option. We also have lots of people who like to use a laser pointer as a low tech or light tech way to communicate with alternative access. So in the middle picture here, top middle, you can see there's a small light, a laser light pointing at the space bar on this keyboard. So lasers can be held in your hand. They can be attached to glasses or a headband, and you can use your head or neck to point. But that gives you a way to point to things without having to kind of use your hand to point necessarily. And then there are options for head and head pointing or switches to also access things. Our training on our website shows more examples of these options, and then also reaching out to your team will help you figure out if some of these tools might be useful for you. And then the final access or AAC option we want to talk about today is eye gaze or eye tracking, which those are terms that are used pretty interchangeably. These are specialized computers that can be controlled by looking at items on the screen. So there's a specialized camera that looks at the reflection from your eye in order to tell where you're looking and lets you activate basically a computer the same way you would, but using your eyes instead of your hands. We typically start to consider this when people are starting to experience changes in both their speech and their hand use. And often the whole team might be involved in deciding the best eye tracking options for you. So the speech language pathologist is typically involved. The OT or PT may help with positioning and deciding kind of how the device will work for you based on your mobility, and the ATP may also be involved. There are many different vendors of eye tracking devices, and the key takeaway that we want, these are some examples of different devices from different companies. The key takeaway that we want you to hear from today's training is that it's really important that you do an evaluation and try more than one system from more than one vendor. The ways that the cameras track your eyes and the features in the software are very different on different devices. and each individual may find certain ones to work better than others for them. And so the best way to do that is to have trials with multiple devices in order to match the best one for your specific needs. Our training on our website about eye gaze talks about this in terms of the process for the evaluation, what you can expect, and then kind of how you can get help with figuring out what eye gaze might be the best for you. I'm going to kind of try to keep moving quickly because we're getting closer to our, I want to leave time for questions. So when we think about the timing of when you may use AAC, we want you to think about, is communication ever challenging for me? Again, this does not have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be that I can't communicate, so now it's time for me to start using AAC. If there are different times of day when it gets more difficult for you to communicate, or if you can communicate just fine with very familiar communication partners, but people who are less familiar with you have a harder time understanding you, or if there are certain environments or settings, let's say over the phone, it's harder to communicate, or when you're in a noisy environment, those might be places that you think about using AAC, even if you're still speaking in other places. And then we do want to point out some really important early considerations. It is really useful if you can start learning to use some of these tools before you fully need them. It's very frustrating if you get to a point where you can't communicate, and that's when you're trying to learn how to use these tools. And so if you have the ability to kind of get your hands on things ahead of time and start practicing, that can be really helpful. The other reason that getting things before you need or getting things early is because there can sometimes be obstacles or delays in obtaining the equipment. For example, eye tracking communication devices are often funded by insurance, or you can often get them through loan closets. But insurance takes a while to process. Doing the evaluation and getting things approved and sent can take a few months. And even with loan closets, there can be waits in order to get that equipment. So it's good to be thinking about this ahead of time so that you can kind of get it when you need it. We have some more advice that we got from people living with ALS. Bruce, a caregiver of someone with ALS, said he thinks that the importance of AAC relates to, he says, I kind of break the importance and the need for communication down into multiple areas. Social daily conversation, business talk, which can mean either if you're still working or you're running a business, but it can also mean like day-to-day life things. If you help make the grocery list, or you help make sure the kids get to school on time, or you help make sure that, the doors are locked at night before you go to bed, you need to be able to communicate about those things. It's really important to be able to communicate about your medical care and your daily care needs, and being able to really control what happens in those in with those areas. And then it's important to be able to communicate about advocacy. And this doesn't necessarily have to mean advocating like going to Washington, D.C. and talking to legislators about communication. It can mean being able to communicate about your daily needs and what you want and how you want your life to look and how you want to be cared for. So we want you to think about AAC as a tool that helps make sure you can always communicate for all of these purposes. And then we have another PALS or person with ALS, Ellen, who's a joint client between ALS United Greater New York and Bridging Voice. And she shared a little information about her experience with learning and support for using AAC. She said, it took many steps along the way to be able to clone my voice and connect it to a text-to-speech app. Learning how to use it in different contexts. For example, conversations, phone calls at a restaurant or a noisy venue. I'm still a beginner on a learning curve, and I'm supported and connected with both organizations as they are connected with each other. And so I think we want to use this quote to highlight that it's not something that happens overnight, but these tools or strategies become a part of your communication. And it's not something that's easy to do alone. So please reach out and make sure that you're connecting with your local team or with our teams to get help with these things. All right. We're going to quickly go through how to plan ahead with confidence so that we can jump into some questions. We have some more advice from people with ALS, and one of the things they gave us information about is where to begin. So one great one from Michael is take a deep breath. Going too fast, too quickly can lead to going down rabbit holes that will waste your time and money. You will get the answers, but focus on getting quality answers. Sean says, My advice is to take it one day at a time. Try to plan in 6-month windows. And Bruce says, you cannot do this alone. There are many great organizations that offer support and are a rich resource and more than helpful. Listen, take notes, and ask questions. So I think what we want you to take away from this is that it's a big deal to start thinking about all of these things, and it doesn't have to be done all at once, and you don't have to do it alone. So one of the ways you can get started is by building your support team, which of course includes your loved ones and also includes experts who have experience to help guide you. So that may be your local ALS clinic and your medical professional, your medical team. And it also may be the state or regional ALS Association or ALS United chapter that's in your state. Those are both really great resources to get on your team and have available to you. Not only do they have many resources internally, but they can help connect you with other resources based on your needs. And then we list some other support organizations here, which I won't go into depth about, but Bridging Voice is here to also help with your communication and your technology needs as well. So what should you be watching out for that will let you know that it's time to get some help? If you notice that you're having changes in your speech and your voice, one example is the rate of speech. You're starting to slow down when you talk. That can be an indication that it may start to get harder for people to understand you, and it's a time to reach out. Similarly, if the volume of your speech starts to get quieter, it may be that it gets quieter after you've been talking for a while, or it could be that at the end of the day or when you're tired, it gets quieter. If you start to see those signs and you haven't already connected with a speech language pathologist, that's a good time to reach out and get some supplemental help with your voice. And similarly, if people start to have difficulty understanding you, your speech intelligibility is changing, that's a time to reach out. It doesn't have to be all or nothing either. Remember, we've said a couple of times, if you have trouble at the end of the day or over the phone or in specific situations, it's a good idea to get some help and get some tools that can make sure you're still communicating effectively. Other changes that you may notice are changes in your motor control. So if you can't access your phone or tablet or computer as effectively as you have in the past, if you start to notice breathing changes, which impact your talking or your fatigue level, and generally, if your energy levels are going down over the day or during certain activities, that can mean that it could start to get harder to communicate as well. So we want to get tools in place for you. And then if you have thinking changes, or we might call them cognitive changes, not everyone with ALS experiences this, but some people do. So if you notice that it's harder to remember things, or your attention or alertness is changing, or the ways you process new information is getting more difficult, we want to get tools in place for you now so that they become more comfortable with you before further changes happen. If you are noticing these kinds of changes, don't struggle through things alone and don't give up. We never want to hear that somebody feels like, oh, that's just something I can't do anymore. If you're finding that you're having changes to how you're communicating or accessing your technology, make sure that you reach out. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going, but I'm not going to go through these organizations. But if you're not sure who to ask anyone that's on your team. If we're not the right person to help you, we will get you connected with the right person to help you. So I just want to wrap up with a couple of really nice quotes from some of our people living with ALS. A couple of we said, if you could give one takeaway, these were some that stood out to me. Michael says, get a notebook and take detailed notes of every interaction. This has saved me more than once. And Sean says, don't let the things that you can't do limit the things that you can do. So these are really important things to think about. We know that ALS changes everything, but we also know that you can still have really meaningful things in your life. And this quote from Michael, I think, captures that really well. Once things settle, find a purpose. Your life is drastically changed, but really think about it as a next chapter. Was there something you weren't happy with before? Change it now. You must find a meaningful purpose. This is the key to not just surviving, but actually thriving. And then we'll wind up with Ellen, who shares the willingness, kindness, and support continues with both Shara and Lane, and they're awesome organizations. Keep me on track and hopeful that I can still communicate no matter what I have to face as disease progresses. And we put this quote in here not because we want to toot our own horns, but because we want to remind you that this is really hard and you don't have to do it alone. Our organizations are here to help keep you on track, to help keep you hopeful, and make sure that you can communicate no matter what. So I didn't leave very much time for questions, but I'm going to go ahead and pause here for a moment and see if we had any questions in the chat that we should highlight. Oh, should I? Okay.
Yeah,
Trinity,
keep going.
yes.
Question and
All
answer
right.
comes
I
after.
love
Yes,
that. Okay, we'll do these resources and then we'll do question and answer. So again, these resources
perfect.
are going to be in the shared documents that come out after with this recording. But we want to make sure you know about ALS United Greater New York's office hours. So you can schedule an appointment with them on Wednesdays from 1 to 2 Eastern if you are in the Greater New York area to talk about assistive technology and accessibility. They also host different trainings and support series, and you can find recordings of all of those on the ALS United Greater New York YouTube channel. And I'm going to fly through these, but they are going to be in your resources later. And then it is Walk ALS season. So if you would like to help raise funds to contribute to advancing the mission of ALS United Greater New York, you can use this website to find a walk in your region. And then we're also going to quickly share some Bridging Voice office hours resources. You can register to get the link and join us every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern for an open discussion forum for talking about anything related to communication and technology. And then we have more Bridging Voice trainings coming in July on communication crash, being ready for tech failure. In September, preserving connection, AAC interventions in ALS through case studies. And in October, ALS and eye tracking, comparing Windows and iOS speech generating devices. So Trinity will put the links to where you can sign up for those trainings. You can also watch our recorded Bridging Voice trainings either on our website where all of the previous resources are linked or on our YouTube channel. And then Trinity is going to pop the professional development attestation into the chat so that you will be able to get credit if you are using this for professional development. All right, sorry, that was a whirlwind. Let's talk about questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Abby. I appreciate it. And thank you to the team and individuals who were answering questions in the chat or asking questions in the chat. At this time, I would like to encourage everyone, please feel free to turn your cameras on. You are welcome to unmute yourself. You are welcome to ask questions. And any format that works for you for your accessibility, you're welcome to say it out loud, raise your hand. You're welcome to put it in the chat. Please remember we have our Bridging Voice team here. We also have Shara here too to answer anything about ALS Greater New York. And I want to reiterate, it was brought up multiple times. Yes, we are talking and highlighting about ALS Greater New York, but ALS Greater New York is part of the ALS United. There are many different chapters all throughout the country that are available to everyone. And so if you are not in New York, please know that there are still accessible options to you to receive support throughout. And so please feel free. Questions at this time?
Trinity, just to add to that, if people do want to connect to their local chapters or their local organizations, ALS United in particular, I can certainly help make those connections if we have some listeners who are not from our local area.
Fabulous. Anyone have a question at this time? We had two questions, Abby, that popped up in the chat. One was they were asking, someone asked us if we have a loaner library. And Karina, think you answered that question. We in fact do at Bridging do not have a loaner library, but what we do is connect you to different organizations that do. One of them happened to be ALS Greater New York, has a loan lending library, and they have a lot of the things that we talked about today that Abby gave us strategies, including, voice amplifiers and the accessible mouse and accessible options, as well as devices at all different levels, tablets and communication devices. So I wanted to share that just to make that really clear.
Yeah, and no matter where you're located, Bridging Voice, we work with nonprofit partners all across the country, so we can help you navigate where to find your best loan closet if that process feels overwhelming, because there are some great loan closets across the country that we partner with.
Just to add to that, Karina and Janity, I think your local clinic team is also a really good resource to finding people. They will know who's in your area and will be able to help get you equipment and any really resources you need.
Yvonne, you had also said that your voice dictation was having a hard time understanding you. I hope that Abby shared a little bit more to be able to answer that question. There are definitely some options. If you are still having some issues, of course, reaching out and getting support, from one of our team members can help you with that process too. So, and a lot of the comments and that were shared by Abby, the quotes that were shared by Abby were actually individuals that are here today. So I want to thank them all for being a part of this, and being willing to share their process and their thoughts through this, through this journey. So thank you to all of you for sharing that.
I think that's so meaningful. I mean, we can talk about from our like professional experience what might be useful or what you might want to think about, but we have not lived it. And so those of you who are living with ALS or caregiving for someone living with ALS, you guys really are key important resources that people can tap into to know more of what to expect and get advice and connect with other people living the same kind of experience. So we sure do appreciate everyone who helps contribute in those ways too.
And Eric, thank you. We we of course do not pay you for your amazing comments, but we always appreciate them. Eric says, Bridging Voice has helped me from day one. They have been a lifeline for me. Best team I've ever worked with. Thank you, Eric, very much so. Perfect. All right. One last chance for questions. Abby, you did such an amazing job. There are no questions.
Oh my, well, I hope so. I hope it's not that I just didn't leave you any time. Please do speak up if you have questions. But thank you so much also. We really appreciate everybody coming.
Absolutely. I want to remind everybody in 27 minutes, we will have open office hours that will be hosted right after this. So I'm going to say our spiel and then stop our recording, and we'll still be here for just a minute. I want to thank you all for joining us here today. Abby, thank you. Shara, thank you very much. This was a wonderful presentation that I think a lot of people are going to benefit from. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can like and subscribe. And thank you again for joining us.